4,000 meters down, sunlight has never arrived. The water is near freezing. The pressure would crush a human skull like paper. And the floor is paved with stones. They look like burnt potatoes, black and pitted, scattered across plains of mud that stretch farther than most countries. They have grown atom by atom over millions of years. Inside them sit cobalt, nickel, copper, and manganese, the metals the energy transition is hunting for batteries, turbines, and grids. Appraisals of that cargo run into the trillions of dollars. The richest carpet lies in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, a Pacific province larger than India, laid between Hawaii and Mexico. No flag flies there. The nodules sit beyond every exclusive economic zone. They sit on what diplomats named the area. If a company wants to drop a collector the size of a combine harvester and vacuum that floor, it does not petition Washington, Beijing, or Brussels. It petitions an office in Kingston, Jamaica. That is the contradiction. Roughly 54% of the world's oceans fall for mineral extraction under an autonomous intergovernmental body most people have never heard named.
The International Seabed Authority. It does not own the water. It does not govern shipping lanes or navies. It holds the exclusive legal power to issue exploration and exploitation contracts for the international seabed. The metals are not a rumor. The machines exist in prototypes. The mystery is older and colder. Who, under law, is allowed to say yes to mining the last unowned floor on Earth?
The story does not begin with a mining ship. It begins with a speech. On November 1, 1967, Arvid Pardo, Malta's ambassador to the United Nations, stood in New York and told the General Assembly that the deep seabed was about to become a colony of whoever arrived first with the best machines. He asked the room to treat that floor as the common heritage of mankind, not a prize for the powerful, not a blank for whoever could weld a pipe long enough. The phrase sounded like poetry. It became a legal project that ate 15 years. Delegates fought over straits, fish, oil, and the width of coastal control. On December 10, 1982, in Montego Bay, states opened the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea for signature. Part 11 carved out the area, the seabed and subsoil beyond national jurisdiction. Article 136 locked the common heritage sentence into treaty language. Article 137 barred any state from claiming sovereignty over it. The convention did not enter into force until November 16, 1994, after a second bargain. Industrialized countries had refused a regime that looked to them like a planned economy on the ocean floor. The 1994 implementation agreement rewired Part 11 toward market access, reduced the power of a proposed ISA mining arm called the Enterprise, and made the institution acceptable enough for ratification. Kingston became the headquarters because Jamaica had hosted the closing conference and wanted the prize. From that building, the authority received a mandate no other body on Earth possesses: administer mineral resources in international waters on behalf of humankind as a whole, and do so through contracts, not conquest. The United States signed neither instrument in a way that bound it. It sits as an observer, arguing custom and security while staying off the membership roll. 168 parties plus the European Union filled the seats instead. What most maps never show is the legal vacuum those seats were built to fill. Coastal states already enclose 200 nautical miles, and in places a continental shelf pushed farther by geology and paperwork. Everything past that line was, until the convention, a lawyer's shrug. Pardo's fear was a 1970s land rush with bathyscaves.
The bargain that answered him created a landlord with no navy and a rulebook that still, decades later, lacks its final chapter. The authority can already lease the right to look. What it has never quite finished is the code that would turn looking into licensed extraction. That unfinished page is not a footnote. It is the reason a speech from 1967 still governs a floor no tourist will ever see. Follow the paper, not the submersible. A corporation cannot walk into Kingston alone. UNCLOS requires a sponsoring state that answers for the contractor's compliance. The state wants minerals, prestige, or a seat at a table larger than its shoreline. The company wants a legal shield and a map. Together, they file. The Legal and Technical Commission, a closed expert panel, reviews geology, finances, and environmental plans, then recommends. The Council decides. The Secretary General signs. Exploration contracts now cover nodules, sulfides, and cobalt-rich crusts across the Pacific, Indian, and Atlantic floors. China holds the largest portfolio through Comra, China Minmetals, and Beijing Pioneer. Japan works through JOGMEC and DORD. Korea, Russia, India, France, Germany, Poland's Interocean Metal Group, and Belgium's Global Sea Mineral Resources take their strips. The most aggressive commercial face is the Metals Company, a NASDAQ-listed firm tied to Nauru Ocean Resources, Inc., Tonga Offshore Mining, and a Kiribati vehicle. Gerard Baring, its chief executive, sells a story of cleaner batteries and fewer child labor pits on land.
Nauru, a republic of 21 square kilometers that already lived through phosphate ruin, offers sovereignty as sponsorship and receives the prospect of royalties. Michael Lodge, a British lawyer who served as Secretary General from 2016 through 2024, treated the institution as a regulator that should also enable an industry. Critics called him a mining diplomat in international organization clothing. In August 2024, the Assembly elected Leticia Carvalho, a Brazilian oceanographer from the UN Environment Program, a choice read in Kingston as a change of weather, if not yet of law. She inherited an authority with two jobs written into the same treaty: promote orderly development of seabed minerals and protect the marine environment from their harm. Those jobs do not love each other. Staff, observers, and contractors share elevators in a Jamaican complex that looks nothing like a throne. Ambition lives in the incentives. Small island sponsors see a rare chance to tax a frontier. Beijing sees battery metals and rule writing power. Engineers see a collector vehicle crawling at 2 meters a second, lifting nodules and returning a sediment plume.
None of them can move from survey to commercial lift without a signature this body has not yet learned how to give at scale. In June 2021, Nauru triggers the fuse. Under a provision of the 1994 agreement, a state that intends to apply for an exploitation contract can force the council to complete the exploitation regulations within 2 years. The clock is meant to prevent permanent delay. It is also a weapon. Nauru, standing behind the metals company, tells Kingston the industry is ready and the rulebook is not allowed to hide. July 9, 2023 arrives. There is no mining code. Delegates leave the Jamaica Conference Center with brackets still strangling the text. Royalty rates, inspection powers, environmental thresholds, liability for a plume that crosses a contract box, the fate of the enterprise, the share owed to humankind. After the deadline, lawyers split. Some argue an application must be considered even without a finished code. Others say consideration without rules would gut the treaty. The council improvises a holding pattern. No commercial license is handed out, none is cleanly forbidden. That is the wound. Into the gap pour two armies that do not share a language. On one side, the energy transition brief. Land-based nickel and cobalt sit in a handful of jurisdictions. Indonesia dominates nickel. The Democratic Republic of Congo dominates cobalt. Automakers and governments want a second tap. Nodules, unlike a terrestrial pit, contain several battery metals in one stone, and no overburden of forest has to be stripped first. Contractors circulate films of prototype collectors on the Abyssal plain and promise smaller human displacement than a new mine ashore. On the other side, the biologists. Nodules are not dead rock, they are habitat. Xenophyophores, sponges, and unknown invertebrates live on and around them. Some species appear nowhere else. A collector does not pluck stones. It scrapes a surface that took millions of years to accrete and throws a sediment cloud that can drift tens of kilometers, smothering animals that filter the dark. Noise and light arrive in a world that evolved without either. In 2022, a letter in Marine Environmental Research and later assessments from the Deep Sea Mining Science Statement gather hundreds of scientists arguing that baseline knowledge is too thin to set safe thresholds. Greenpeace occupiers board a vessel. Palau, Fiji, Chile, France, Germany, and a lengthening list of states call for a moratorium or a precautionary pause.
The authority's own Legal and Technical Commission meets behind doors. Observers complain that environmental data submitted by contractors is treated as confidential commercial property. France, having once held an exploration contract through Ephemer, becomes one of the loudest European voices against a rush. China keeps its contracts and its patience, filling working groups, training diplomats, and treating the rulebook as a long game it intends to help write. Present tense, now. A council session in Kingston. Translators lean into headsets. A Pacific minister speaks of ancestral ocean and of a budget that cannot refuse a royalty. A European delegate recites the precautionary principle. An African group asks again how benefit sharing can be real if the first tons leave on a ship flagged to someone else. The draft regulations swell past 100 pages and still will not close. Royalty options swing between a simple ad valorem cut and a two-stage profit scheme. Each number decides whether a small sponsor ever sees a check.
Liability language stalls on a nightmare scenario, a sediment disaster that cannot be undone, an operator that dissolves, a sponsoring state whose entire GDP would not cover the claim. The dual mandate stops being a paragraph and becomes a room that cannot adjourn. In January 2024, Norway's parliament votes to open parts of its own extended continental shelf to seabed minerals, a national shelf, not the area. Yet the vote lands in Kingston as weather. If states begin mining what they already control, pressure rises on the international regime not to look obsolete. Through 2024 and 2025, the council keeps meeting. Carvalho takes office in 2025 and inherits both the unfinished text and a staff culture built under Lodge. She does not possess a veto that can invent consensus. The metals company tells markets it is preparing an application anyway, using the 2-year residue as a legal theory. Conservation states tell the assembly that issuing a license under a ghost code would be a breach dressed as procedure. No court has settled that fight. The International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea can advise. It has not been asked to finish the politics.
Meanwhile, survey cruises continue under existing exploration contracts, mapping every potato of metal, because looking remains legal. Each new bathymetric line makes the unowned floor less unknown and harder to leave untouched. Barriers break in sequence. First the speech, then the treaty, then the contracts to search. Then a small island pulls a clause written for another century. Then the deadline expires, and the institution discovers it can be forced to the edge of a decision it is not ready to own. Dominoes do not fall neatly. They lean. A license granted too soon could lock in environmental harm no later assembly can reverse. A license refused without a finished code could send capital into unilateral theories, or into national shelves, or into a quiet decade of maps and lobbyists. Kingston remains the only door. The door has no finished lock.
What Kingston finally reveals is not a conspiracy. It is a thinner fact and colder. Humanity can write a sentence, common heritage, and then spend half a century arguing about the invoice. The deep ocean is not empty because it is mysterious. It is empty of flags because no empire could occupy it cheaply, and so the law arrived before the machines were ready. That sequence is rare. Usually steel comes first, and the statute apologizes later. Here, the statute sits in a Caribbean capital, waiting for a collector vehicle to make the wait expensive. Governance of a commons always looks generous at the founding, and cramped at the harvest. Fish taught that lesson in shallower water. The atmosphere is teaching it in carbon. The abyss teaches it with stones that grow slower than any institution. The channel's subject is not a villain in a tower. It is a mechanism, an exclusive contracting power placed in a body with two opposing duties, funded by the same states that want metals, votes, and moral cover at once. Intention was to stop a land rush. Outcome, so far, is a regulated pause that satisfies no faction and still maps every hectare for the day the pause ends. The allegation is that the process is captured. Fact is that contractors write the surveys, experts read them in private, and the public inherits a press release. Scenario is a first commercial lift within a few years if the code or a workaround lands. Prediction is not required. The floor will still be dark. The question is what kind of permission darkness deserves. Stand on the thought of that mud. A legal membrane a few hundred pages thick, argued in 3 languages, is asked to stand in for a surface larger than any nation's territory. No navy enforces it, no voter tours it. The signature that would open it lives in a city famous for a harbor, not for an abyss. If the code is ever finished, it will not feel like a flag raising. It will feel like a stamp. And a stamp on half a planet is a strange thing to leave in a filing cabinet. Who should be allowed to cache a heritage no living person has seen?